On the night of May 1, 1945, deep underground in Berlin, a small girl in a white nightdress stood in a narrow bunker hallway. She hummed a childish tune, teasing a tired soldier. The war above was ending, but inside the bunker, time felt frozen. Within hours, 6 children would be dead. Most people believe this is where the Goebbels story ends, sealed under concrete, ideology, and poison. But history is rarely that simple. One child of Magda Goebbels survived the war, and his descendants would go on to control one of the most powerful industrial fortunes in modern Europe. This is not just a story about the end of the Third Reich. It is about belief, denial, survival, and money. A mother who refused escape. In the final days of the war, Magda Goebbels had options. Allies of the regime offered to help her flee Berlin with her children. Safe routes were discussed. Even Albert Speer later claimed he tried to help. Magda rejected every offer. On April 22, 1945, she moved into the Vorbunker with her husband, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. As Soviet shells closed in, Joseph pledged loyalty to Hitler until the end. But Magda's decision was driven by something darker. In a letter written to her eldest son, Harold, who was already a prisoner of war, she explained her belief clearly. A world without National Socialism was a world her children should not live in. The last night, the children spent their final days playing underground, unaware of what was coming. They drew pictures, laughed, and mocked the adults around them. To them, it was only another strange place the parents had taken them. On the evening of May 1, Magda gathered them in their shared room. She told them they would receive injections to help them sleep. The children trusted her completely. They were sedated and placed in their beds, still dressed in nightclothes. What followed would remain disputed for decades. Later examinations showed that while most of the children never woke up, the eldest daughter, Helga, did. Evidence suggested fear and resistance, proof that the deaths were not peaceful for everyone. This single detail shattered the comforting myth that the children simply fell asleep. A trial without justice. After the war, questions were asked. One man, the SS dentist involved that night, eventually stood trial in West Germany. Despite facing serious charges, he walked free. The judges, both former members of the Nazi Party, ruled that his actions were minor and coerced. Amnesty laws designed to help rebuild Germany became shields against accountability. For the 6 children, there would be no justice. The son who lived, Harold Quandt, Magda's son from her first marriage, was not in Berlin. Captured earlier in the war, he survived in Allied custody. He learned about the deaths of his half-siblings years later. Returning to a destroyed Germany, Harold stepped back into a family fortune that had survived the war far better than most. Together with his half-brother Herbert, he rebuilt and expanded the Quandt industrial empire. By the 1960s, they held controlling influence over companies like Varta and a struggling car manufacturer called BMW. The gamble paid off. BMW rose from near collapse to global dominance. Even after Harold's death in 1967, the family's control only grew stronger. Today, his descendants rank among Germany's wealthiest individuals. Erased graves, lasting wealth. While the Quandt fortune expanded, the remains of the Goebbels children followed a very different path. Soviet authorities secretly moved and buried them, then erased the graves decades later under strict orders. No markers, no records, no place to mourn. Attempts to build a memorial for the children failed. The debate remains unresolved. Can victims be remembered when their parents were monsters? The story we prefer to tell. History often softens uncomfortable truths. It claims the children died peacefully. That the mother was merely obeying orders. That symbolism explains everything. The evidence suggests otherwise. Magda Goebbels made the decision herself. She rejected escape. She believed ideology mattered more than life. And at least one child understood what was happening. The regime collapsed. The beliefs died, but the fortune did not. The bunker ended one bloodline, and redirected another. Closing. The Goebbels children vanished into history without graves or memorials. The Quandt legacy lives on through factories, balance sheets, and cars driven across the world. The ideology was defeated. The money survived. History doesn't always end. Sometimes, it just changes hands. Agar Aap Chaho to Maine, When the war finally ended, the world believed the Goebbels name had been buried forever beneath the ruins of Berlin. 6 children gone, their parents dead, an ideology defeated, but one branch of that family tree had already escaped the bunker. The son who wasn't there. Harold Quandt was Magda Goebbels' eldest child, born from her first marriage to industrialist Gunther Quandt. By 1945, Harold was already an adult and serving as a German officer. He had been captured by Allied forces months earlier and was held as a prisoner of war far from Berlin. This distance saved his life. While his mother and half-siblings spent their final days underground, Harold was unaware of what was unfolding. He would not learn the truth until after his release, years later. For a long time, he believed the children might still be alive somewhere. They were not, returning to a broken country. When Harold returned to Germany, he found a nation in ruins. Cities destroyed, industries shattered, millions dead, but some fortunes, quietly and carefully protected, had survived. The Quandt family wealth was one of them. The family had been deeply involved in wartime manufacturing. After the war, much of this past was minimized, reclassified, or legally neutralized during denazification proceedings. Like many industrial families, the Quandts were allowed to continue operating. Harold did not inherit ideology. He inherited assets. Rebuilding an empire, working alongside his half-brother Herbert Quandt, Harold focused on business, not politics. Together, they expanded their holdings across multiple industries. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, the brothers had gained major influence over 2 key companies. Varta, a battery manufacturer. BMW, a struggling car company facing collapse. At the time, BMW was close to being sold off entirely. The Quandts stepped in, invested heavily, restructured leadership, and bet on Germany's economic recovery. That bet changed everything, from near failure to global power. As West Germany experienced its economic miracle, BMW transformed with it. The company shifted from survival mode to innovation and luxury. Over the following decades, it became one of the most recognizable automotive brands in the world. Harold Quandt did not live to see the full scale of that success. In 1967, he died in a plane crash at the age of 45. But his shares did not disappear. They passed to his children. A legacy worth billions. Today, Harold Quandt's descendants, including Suzanne Klatten and Stefan Quandt, rank among the richest people in Germany. Their combined wealth is measured in tens of billions. BMW vehicles are driven on every continent. The company stands as a symbol of German engineering and global capitalism. Few drivers realize how closely that success is linked to a family whose name once echoed through Hitler's bunker. While money grew, bodies vanished. As the Quandt empire expanded, the remains of the 6 Goebbels children followed a very different fate. Soviet authorities secretly moved and reburied them multiple times. Decades later, the graves were erased entirely. No public records, no memorial, no place to mourn. The children were removed from history, physically and symbolically. By the late 1940s, the war was over, the Nazi leadership was gone, and Germany had been split in 2. But the story of the Goebbels children did not end with the deaths. In many ways, it became more complicated. Their bodies had become evidence. Evidence that could not be shown. When Soviet forces entered Berlin, they documented everything inside Hitler's bunker. The children's deaths were recorded, examined, and archived. For the Soviet Union, these remains were not just victims, they were symbols. Symbols of Nazi fanaticism, symbols of moral collapse, and potentially, tools for propaganda. For years, the bodies were kept secret, moved between locations, hidden from the public. Officially, nothing was said. Unofficially, their existence remained a quiet problem. Buried, moved, and buried again. In 1946, the remains were secretly buried at a Soviet-controlled intelligence site in East Germany. No markers were placed. No families were informed. The location was classified. For nearly 25 years, the children lay there, unknown to the world. Magda Goebbels' mother searched for her grandchildren for years. She wrote letters, asked officials, and followed rumors. She never found them. She never knew that, eventually, there would be nothing left to find. The 1970 order, In April 1970, a decision was made at the highest level of Soviet leadership. The head of the KGB issued a direct order. All remaining Nazi-associated remains at the site were to be removed permanently. The graves were opened. The remains were destroyed. The ashes were scattered in a nearby river. No ceremony, no record, no grave. The reason was never officially explained. Some historians believe the Soviets feared the site could become a gathering place for extremists. Others argue it was simply an effort to close unfinished business from a war that still haunted Europe. Whatever the reason, the result was final. Can innocence be remembered? Decades later, one man tried to change that. Rokas Misch, the last surviving communications operator from Hitler's bunker, proposed a memorial for the 6 children. His argument was simple. They were children. They made no decisions. They committed no crimes. Remembering them, he argued, was not honoring Nazism, it was recognizing innocent lives lost to ideology. The proposal sparked fierce debate. Should the children of Nazi leaders be memorialized? Does remembrance risk sympathy for the family name? Or does silence unfairly punish the innocent? There was no consensus. The memorial was never built. The myths that replaced the truth. Over time, myths filled the silence. One popular claim suggested the children were named with the same initial as Adolf Hitler as a form of devotion. This was later disproven. The naming pattern existed in the family long before Hitler. Another myth suggested Joseph Goebbels ordered everything. Historical evidence does not support this. Accounts indicate the decision came from Magda herself. Simpler stories were easier to repeat. Messier truths were ignored. Why this story still matters. The Goebbels children left no descendants. No graves. No memorial. Yet the financial empire connected to their family continued to grow elsewhere, untouched by their fate. This story forces an uncomfortable question. What does justice look like after mass collapse? History often punishes symbols and spares systems. Ideologies fall. Structures adapt. Money moves forward. Closing. Memory without comfort. The 6 children remain nameless to most of the world, their story reduced to footnotes or myths. Their parents are remembered as villains. Their surviving half-brother is remembered as an industrialist. History did not give this story a clean ending. It left behind silence, wealth, and unanswered questions. And perhaps that is the most honest ending history can offer.